Hello everyone, welcome to another video in this full stack Flutter development series. In this video, we will continue to implement our food order backend, and we'll be looking at implementing our token service, our password service, and also our controller and our express router. So this video has a lot in it. So here in Visual Studio Code, as you can see here, I already have an interface for my password service. And so here I'm also going to add another interface for my token service. So I'm going to call it token service. And inside here, I am going to have two methods. So I'm going to create my interface, token service, and for my interface, I want two methods. I want an encode method, which takes in a payload, which can either be a string or an object. And then it will return also a string or an object. So this is my encode method. I'll also want a decode method, and our decode method will take in the token. The token can be a string or an object, and it also returns a string or an object. So this is the interface for my token service. And so I am going to go into our data module, and we are going to implement those services. I'm going to create another folder, services, and I'm going to create a file, and I'm going to call it bcrypt password service, since I'll be using a package, the bcrypt package, to handle our password hashing. So I am going to say create my class, bcrypt password service, and this will implement the password service, which has two methods, the hash and the compare. So now for my constructor, I am going to say I'm going to inject as a dependency for the bcrypt hashing package the salt, something that is known as a salt rounds, and bcrypt used this number to determine the level of hashing. So the algorithm uses this number. So the higher the number, the slower the process, the algorithm, but the more secure is the hash. So I'm going to give it a default of 10, since bcrypt recommend a default of 10, and I am going to import bcrypt if I have it. No, I do not have it, so I need to install that package. So to install bcrypt, we will go to our terminal and we'll say npm I bcrypt. We'll also install the TypeScript types in our dev dependency. So go ahead and install that. And there we go. So now, if we should say import bcrypt, from bcrypt, and now we can use bcrypt to generate our hash. So we basically return bcrypt hash, and we'll pass in the password as the data and also the salt. So that's us generating our hash using bcrypt. And for our compare, we'll say return, because this will return a boolean, return bcrypt compare password with our hash. And so that's our bcrypt password service. We'll also now create our token service, but this will be our JWT token. So our JWT token service, export default class JWT token service, and this will implement our iToken service. So that will implement our token service, which has two methods. Well, this is supposed to be encode, so let me quickly change that. Not encode URI, encode. So for JWT, we'll also need to install JWT. So npm I JWT. It is not JWT, but JSON web token. So npm I JSON web token. So we let that install. Then we will install also the types, and we'll install the types in our dev dependencies. So go ahead, install the types. Now that our types are installed, we can now import JWT from JSON web token, and inside the constructor of our JSON Web Token service will accept read-only a private key, and this can be read from an environmental variable. So our private key, which is of type string. So now to encode, we'll use JSON Web Token to create a token based off the payload and return that token. So let token equal JWT. Use the sign method to sign it. And for the data, I am going to say payload as the data, then the private key, and then some options. So I want the issuer to be com food app, and you can give it your own issuer. You can also read about JSON Web Token npm package to see the different options that are available. And I'm going to say expires in, and for now I'm going to say in 1 hour for now. And after I sign the token, I am just returning the newly created and signed token. Now for the decode method, I have to put this between a try catch to catch any exception or error. So if the token is invalid, I'll catch that error and return it. So var or const decoded equal JWT verify. So I use the verify method, and you pass in the token and also the private key. Right, so the token cannot be an object, it has to be a string. So let me get rid of that. Verify token, private key, then return the decoded token. If there is an error, I want to return invalid token. So there is our token service, our JWT token service. So we have implemented our services, our bcrypt password service, our token service. And now I am going to create our controller. So for our controller, I am going to create another folder called entry point. This is where we gain entry to the application using controllers and our routers. And I'll then create another folder here called controllers. And inside the controller, I am going to create the Auth Controller. But since I need only one controller here, there's no need for me to create this folder, so I'm going to remove this folder. And then inside entry, that's where I'll create my Auth Controller and my Auth Router. So for my controller, I am going to create export default class Auth Controller, and I want a public method. This public method which is the sign in method for now. So this is the method that will handle the sign in logic. So for our controller, for its dependencies, it will use the sign in use case. So sign in use case, which is of type sign in use case, and I'll also use the token service to generate our token or auth token if the user is successfully signed in. So inside of our constructor, I am going to say sign in, pass in those dependencies, sign in use case of type sign in use case, and also our token service of type token service. Those I'll just instantiate my sign in use case and my token service. This should be private read only. So there we have configured our dependencies. Now for our sign in method, this method will be called using our express router, and so it will accept an express request and an express response object. So in order to gain access to those, we need to first install Express. So I'm going to go to my terminal and I'm going to say npm I express to install Express, which is our HTTP server. And I'm also going to install Express types. So again, install Express inside of our dev dependencies types. So we have Express installed. So now for our controller, we are going to import Express. So import, I'm going to import all as Express from express. So now this method will accept the express request object and also the express response object, and we'll use those objects to fetch the parameters from our request and also to return our response. So between a try catch block I am going to say const email and password. So now I'm going to fetch this from the request. So request body. So I'm going to get our email and password from the request. And if they are not present, that will throw an error, which we'll catch and return to the user. So now I'm going to say return this sign in use case. I'm going to execute the use case with the email and the password. Then handling the promise. Then where there is an ID return, I am going to say response, set the status to be 200, then set the JSON object of the response to be auth token, and this will be using the token service to encode the returned user ID. So this will generate a token for us and return that in the response object. Now if there is an error, so catch, if there is an error of type error, then I am going to say response that set the status to be a 404 error and the JSON object to have error and return the error message, error dot message. And similarly inside our catch block of our try catch, I'm going to say again response or return response, set the status to 400 and the JSON to be error and pass the error. So there we have our sign in method that will be executed on our controller whenever the user requests a sign in route. So after we have configured our controller, we have to configure our router to now execute this method on the controller, because Express uses routes to determine what method to execute. So again, I am going to create our auth router and I'm going to say export default class auth router. Now this router is where a lot of the dependencies will be configured and composed together. So I'm going to create a static method called configure. This method will return an express router. So let me import express from express, or import all as express. So express router, and then inside the configure method we will pass in all our dependencies. So to configure our router and our controller, we will need our auth repository, which will be used by our use case. Auth repository. We'll also need our token service, which is used by our controller, token service, and our password service, password service. So we need all these dependencies. And now I'm going to gain access to the router object from express, which is equal to express router. This is the object that express uses to determine the routes or the path that is to be executed based on the HTTP request. So I again have a handle to the router. Now I am going to set up my controller. So controller equal to, I am going to create another static method inside the router called auth router compose controller. And this method, in this method, I'll pass in auth repository, token service, and also the password service. Then I will configure my route for sign in. So I'm going to say router post. So whenever there's a post to sign in, then this callback function will be executed with the request and response object from express. So it will call the controller and call the sign in method on the controller, pass in the request and the response object. Then I will return the router. So here I configure my route and also set up the dependencies for my controller. So for the static method, compose controller, it's going to be a private static compose controller. It will return an auth controller and will accept an auth repository, the token service, and also the password service. Then I'll configure the dependencies to create the controller. So sign in use case equal new sign in use case, passing in the auth repository, also the password service, since those are the two dependencies for our sign-in use case. And then for our controller, we'll say new auth controller, and we'll pass in the use case, sign-in use case, and also our token service. Then we will return the controller. So now we have our auth router set up with a post method to our sign-in route, which will in turn execute the sign-in method from our controller. So here we compose the dependencies and set up our route for this auth router class. Now we will test this router to ensure everything is working as it should. So inside of our tests, auth, we'll create another folder, entry point, and here we will create our auth router spec ts. So this test or this auth router test will be run on a live server or an execution of our dev server using a package known as supertest. So with supertest, we do not have to use postman to run our test every time. We can use supertest, write our test, and it will execute as if we were using postman. So I am going to install supertest. So npm I, inside of our dev dependencies, supertest. And we'll use this to create request objects to execute request to our express routes. We'll also install the types. There we go. So for our test, I'm going to say describe auth router then I'm gonna configure the dependencies. So the repository type auth repository, and I'm also gonna create an express application. So the app, which is of type express application. So now I need to import express. So import again express from express, change this to common letter, and I'm going to create a user that I already have here. Just copy and paste. And then let us configure the dependency. So before, using the before each hook, before each test, I am going to say repository I'm going to use my fake repository, new fake repository, then token service, say let token service equal new JSON web token service, pass in a random string for the private key. Then I'm going to use for password service equal new bcrypt password service, and then for my app I'm going to say app equal express, which is to create a new instance of an express application. Then I'm going to configure a few middlewares for the app to use, and which is I'm going to say app that use express JSON. So this is basically a JSON parser, so that express can parse the JSON body. So if you look inside of our Auth controller here, where I'm using request body and parsing the information into this JSON object, if I do not configure this JSON middleware and also the URL encoded middleware, so express URL encoded, I'm gonna set extended to true. So if I do not configure these two, then I won't have access to the request body in this fashion. So I configure those middlewares. Now I need to configure my routes or my router that I just created. So I'm gonna say use, gonna create a route for auth, and I'm going to, for the router used for that route will be my auth router, and configure with all those dependencies, token service, password service. So now this will generate the path or the route to our controller. So this basically will result in r/sign in. So whenever this path is executed from Postman or from the browser, then it will execute the sign in method on the Auth controller. So now that we have configured everything, now we can run some tests using supertest. So I'm going to say it should return 404 when the user is not found. So I'm going to say await request, and this is from supertest. So let me import that. Let me import request from supertest. So now I'll use that request object to make a request to our app, to our Express app, and we'll send a post method to this endpoint auth sign in. So we'll make a request to that endpoint, and we will send an empty JSON as our request body, and I'm going to say I am expecting 404 for the status. So this is the test. So basically this will start a new Express server and will send a post request to this endpoint with an empty JSON body, and so I'm expecting a 404 user not found response. This is the same thing that you will basically do in Postman, but as I said before, it's better to write your test than to be using Postman all the time to run the test. So now if I should execute this test to see how it works, as you can see, we are having a failing test. So we need to figure out why our test failed. And here it says connection refused. So I need to figure out what's the cause of that. So the issue with our failing test is that we have errors in our routes. So inside of our router, as you can see, I have the spelling wrong here. Should be sign in. And also inside of our router spec, the path should start with a /. So now if I run this test, I am expecting it to pass, and there we go. So now we have a passing test. So that's when the user is not found. So for our next test, it should return 200 and a token when user is found. So now with this test, I'm going to use a valid user. So I'm going to say await request, pass in our Express app. I'm going to make a post request to auth sign in, and I'm going to send in the email, which is user.email, password, which is user password, and I'm going to set some header options. So I'm going to say accept application JSON, and I am going to say expect content type to be JSON. You can read more on supertest to get an understanding of the different parameters involved. So I'm expecting a 200 response. Then for my response, I'm going to execute a callback. The response, then expect, this is an expectation from the child library. I'm going to expect that the response dot body dot auth token to not be empty. So that is my expectation. So if I should run this test, as you can see, we are having our test is passing. So the user is valid and a token is returned, since the user is found based on the email and the password. So that's it for this video, guys. We have configured our controller, our Auth router, and we have tested it using supertest rather than postman. In our next set of videos, we continue to build out our back end and to start our express server that we can make requests to it from our Flutter applications. So see you in the next one, guys, and thank you for watching. And remember, the code is on GitHub if you are just here and you want to follow along. Thank you.